There's a mixing bowl sitting in a kitchen cabinet in Ohio right now. White glass, a little heavier than it looks, with a faded pattern around the outside that's been washed so many times you can barely make out what it's supposed to be. It came into the family as a wedding gift sometime around 1960. Got used for pancake batter and potato salad and Christmas cookie dough for 40 years. And now it holds spare keys and rubber bands on a shelf above the refrigerator. Nobody in that house would guess it's worth more than a few dollars. But a bowl from that same short-lived pattern run same glass, same faded printing, changed hands for close to $6,000. That's not a fluke, and it's not the exception you'd assume. It's one example of something happening right now in kitchens all over this country, because the generation that bought these bowls new is in its 80s and 90s, and their children are the ones emptying the cabinets. Almost nobody stops to look at the plain white bowl before it goes into a 50-cent box at the estate sale. This video is a list. 10 types of old mixing bowls that ended up in American kitchens between roughly the 1800s and the 1970s. Some are worth exactly what you'd assume. One of them is worth more than a used car. By the end, you'll know which is which, and more importantly, you'll understand what actually separates them, because it's almost never the thing people assume matters most. Here's why this is worth your time right now, more than it would have been 10 years ago. A mixing bowl is the least glamorous object in a kitchen. It has no brand story attached to it in most people's minds, no display value, no obvious reason to keep it once the person who used it is gone. It gets used, chipped, run through a dishwasher, stacked with 3 other bowls that don't match, and eventually donated. That's exactly what makes this category strange today. Nobody was collecting these on purpose. Nobody put them in a cabinet behind glass. They were work tools. And because they were work tools, the ones that survived in genuinely good condition, unchipped, unfaded, complete as a set, are far rarer than the number originally made would suggest. There's a timing element too, the same one behind almost every hidden fortune in a cabinet story right now. Households are being sorted at a scale this country hasn't seen. Kitchens get cleared out fastest and least carefully of any room in the house, because kitchenware feels replaceable in a way that jewelry and furniture don't. A stack of old bowls sits in a blind spot in that process, too ordinary to look valuable, too worn to look like an antique, and completely unrecognizable to anyone who doesn't already know what the marks on the bottom mean. That blind spot is exactly where a $2 thrift shelf and a 4-figure auction listing turn out to be the same bowl. So we're counting down 10 types of old mixing bowls, starting with the ones you'll find in any antique mall in the country, ending with the one that looks the least important of all of them. Number 10 is the Texas Ware Confetti Bowl from the 1950s and 60s. These are the speckled plastic bowls, melamine, technically in muted browns, olive greens, and pale blues, with flecks of color scattered through them that look like confetti or terrazzo. They were built to be unbreakable, which is exactly why so many of them are still around. You'll find them stamped Texas Ware on the bottom. A single bowl in good shape typically brings somewhere between $50 and $70. And a nesting set of several will land somewhere in the $100 to $200 range. The honest reality check here, and we'll come back to this more than once tonight. Plastic is plastic. These sell for what they sell for, because mid-century decorators like the look, not because they're rare. Fading, deep knife scarring, and warping from a dishwasher all cut the value hard. If this is what's in the cabinet, it's a fun piece of design history. It is not a windfall. Number 9 is the Pyrex Primary Colors Nesting Set, the 4-bowl stack. In red, blue, green, and yellow, that was in what feels like every American kitchen from the mid-1940s onward. These are numbered 401 through 404 on the bottom. Smallest to largest, and a complete matched set in decent condition generally runs somewhere between $100 and $300. Individual bowls often sell for $20 to $30. Where this one gets interesting is the difference between a set and a matched set. Because these were sold together and then split up across decades of use, most of what's on the market today is mismatched, a faded yellow from one era stacked with a bright red from another. An early set from the first years of production, with all four colors still deep and even and no dishwasher-dulled surfaces, sits at the top of that range rather than the bottom. Same bowls, same pattern, very different money, and the only variable is how they were washed for 60 years. Number 8 is the American yellowware or stoneware banded mixing bowl. The heavy earthenware bowls in a mustard cream color with simple blue or white bands around the outside. These were the workhorse bowls of American kitchens from the 1800s through the early 20th century, and companies like Robinson Ransbottom kept making versions of them well into the modern era. Most of what turns up sells in a fairly narrow band, roughly $50 to a few $100s for a single bowl, with sets reaching $400 or more. The thing that separates a $50 yellowware bowl from a $300 one is almost never the color, its age, size, and whether the surface is intact. These bowls crazed, cracked, and chipped constantly because they were used hard and dropped often. A large early example with no hairline cracks running through the glaze is genuinely uncommon, and that's what buyers are actually paying for. This is also the point on the list where families start guessing wrong in both directions. An old-looking bowl isn't automatically valuable, and a boring-looking one isn't automatically cheap. Number 7 is the Pyrex Gooseberry Cinderella set, particularly the pink on white and white on pink versions from the late 1950s. Cinderella bowls are the ones with the two pinched pouring spouts on opposite sides, one for pouring, one to grip, and they're one of the most recognizable shapes in American kitchenware. A complete 4-bowl gooseberry set in good condition typically sells for somewhere between $250 and $550. What matters here is pattern brightness. These patterns were silk screened onto the glass, not baked deep into it, which means decades of dishwashing physically wore the design away. 2 bowls that came off the same production line in 1958 can be worth wildly different amounts today, based purely on whether the household hand-washed or not. And this previews the biggest misconception on this whole list. The value isn't in owning the pattern. It's in owning a piece the pattern hasn't been scrubbed off of. Number 6 is the Pyrex Atomic Eyes chip and dip set from the 1950s. The turquoise design of elongated ovals with plus signs inside them, which collectors nicknamed Eyes. It was sold as a 2-piece set, a large bowl, a small dip bowl, and a metal bracket that held the small one over the rim of the large one. A single bowl from this pattern typically brings $300 to $800, and a complete set with both bowls and the original bracket still together can push past $1,000. That bracket is the whole story. It was a thin piece of stamped metal that served no purpose once the party was over, so it got thrown out, bent, lost in a move, or separated from the bowls it belonged to within a few years. The glass survived, the hardware didn't, and a set that's complete today is worth multiples of the same 2 bowls, sitting on a shelf without it, which is the first real hint of the pattern that runs through everything above this point. We're just past halfway, and this is where that pattern needs naming directly, because it's bigger than any single bowl on this list. Notice what's actually been driving value so far. It hasn't been how pretty the design is. It hasn't been how old the bowl is. It's been how many were made, how long the pattern was in production, whether the piece survived unfaded and unchipped, and whether the parts that came with it are still there. If you've been mentally sorting bowls into the fancy ones and the plain ones, That's the wrong filter. The right filter is how short was the production run, how many survived in this condition, and is it complete? There's a second layer that only becomes obvious once you've walked through several of these side by side. The bowls people assume are valuable, big, recognizable patterns, cheerful colors, sets everyone remembers from childhood, are often exactly the ones a company mass-produced because it expected enormous demand. The genuinely rare pieces tend to look almost boring by comparison, precisely because they were promotional runs, regional test items, or giveaways that were never sold in stores at all, and therefore never made in real numbers. Keep that inverted logic in mind, because from here, it gets literal. Number 5 is the 19th century mocha-decorated yellowware bowl. The antique earthenware bowls with feathery, tree-like decoration running around a colored band in blue, green, or brown. Collectors call the pattern seaweed. The decoration was created by dripping an acidic mixture onto wet slip and letting it feather out on its own, which means no two are identical. A large example in honest condition commonly sells in the $700 to $1,200 range through dealers, with the biggest and cleanest pieces going higher. These are frequently the oldest object in an entire house, and nobody in the family knows it. They get used as fruit bowls, put on a shelf as decoration, or written off as some old brown bowl. Size drives the money here more than anything. A 12 or 13-inch example is substantially harder to find than a small one, because the big ones took the most abuse and broke first. Number 4 is the Fire King Jadeite mixing bowl set, the opaque jade green glass made by Anchor Hocking, particularly the tapered teardrop-style bowls. Jadeite has one of the most passionate collector followings in all of American kitchenware, driven heavily by mid-century kitchen restorations. A complete 4-bowl teardrop set in clean condition sold at auction for $1,200, and clean sets consistently land in that neighborhood. The catch with jadeite is that condition is brutally visible. The green surface shows every utensil scar, every chip, and every cloudy patch from hard water. And unlike a patterned bowl, there's nothing for damage to hide behind. A set that spent 40 years in a cabinet, rather than in daily rotation, is worth several times the identical set that was someone's everyday mixing bowl. And that's the entire difference between a $100 stack and a 4-figure one. Number 3 is the Pumpkin Butterprint Cinderella set. Butterprint is the pattern with the Amish farmer and wife, the crops, and the rooster. And most people have only ever seen it in turquoise on white, but it was also produced in orange on white, officially called pumpkin butterprint, and that version was never a standard store item. It was offered in 1965 through a grocery store trading stamp program, the kind where you collected books of stamps and traded them in. A complete 4-bowl set today sells for over $1,000, reaching $1,750 at auction, and even single bowls in excellent condition bring $400 or more. Same pattern, same factory, same era. The turquoise version is a $50 bowl, and the orange one is a $400 bowl. And the only difference is that one was sold in stores to everyone, and the other required somebody to save stamps for months. That's production volume doing all the work. And it's the clearest possible demonstration of why the familiar-looking thing and the valuable thing can be the exact same design. Number 2 is the small blue butterprint bowl that was never supposed to exist. A dealer in New York picked one up at a flea market, a butterprint bowl, in a size that doesn't appear in the standard 4-bowl set, smaller than the smallest one Pyrex ever put into production. He listed it, and it sold for $2,100. It's believed to have been a promotional piece, and fewer than 10 are thought to exist. Sit with what that means, because it's the whole thesis of this video in one object. The pattern is one of the most common Pyrex patterns ever made. You can buy a bowl in it this afternoon for under $50. The value wasn't in the pattern at all. It was in the size, a detail so small that most people looking at a stack of butterprint bowls would never notice one was wrong. Nobody was hunting for it, because almost nobody knew it existed. The person who found it wasn't lucky. They just knew what the standard sizes were supposed to be. And this one wasn't. And that brings us to number 1, the Lucky in Love Bowl. It's a small, round, lidded piece of white opal glass from 1959, printed with tall, spiky grass, green 4-leaf clovers, and pink hearts. It was a promotional pattern made in a single run and printed on one shape only. On paper, nothing about it looks like the most valuable item on this list. It's plain white glass. There's no gold, no elaborate design, no famous name printed on the front. Sitting in a cabinet next to a stack of butterprint, it would be the piece you'd overlook. And that's exactly the point. So few were made that for years collectors argued about whether it genuinely existed or was just a photograph in a reference book. People who had spent decades in this hobby had never seen one in person. Then, in 2017, an employee sorting through a box of donated Pyrex at a Goodwill in Western New York unwrapped one. The listing was viewed more than 19,000 times, 60 bidders fought over it, and it sold for $5,994, the highest amount that Goodwill had ever taken on its auction site. An earlier example had already sold for $4,000 on eBay, and pieces from this and other short-run promotional patterns have traded anywhere in the $4,000 to $5,000 range since. Small, plain, and white turned out to be the rarest combination on this entire list, not the most obvious one. One warning attached to that, because it matters. The pattern was reissued in 2018 after all the publicity. The new ones are clear glass storage dishes with plastic lids and no pouring spouts, and they sell for $20 to $60. If it's clear glass with a plastic lid, it's the reissue. The original is opaque white with a glass lid. So, here's the honest takeaway, and it's the same one we opened with. Most old mixing bowls sitting in most kitchen cabinets in this country are not worth thousands of dollars. The realistic range for the overwhelming majority is somewhere between a few dollars and a few hundred, and that's true even for pieces that look old, charming, and full of history. That's not a disappointment. That's the accurate picture, and accuracy is exactly why the pieces that break the pattern are worth knowing about at all. What that means practically is this. Before any old bowl goes into a donation box or a 50-cent yard sale bin, turn it over and actually look. Check the mark on the bottom, because the shape and wording of that mark is how these get dated. The phrase, "Made in USA," was added in the mid-1950s and used into the 60s, and the round stamp format was dropped later on in favor of straight lines of text. Check the number, because the size stamped on the base is often the entire difference between a common bowl and a piece that shouldn't exist. Keep sets together, because a complete matched set is worth substantially more than the same bowls sold one at a time, and a lid or a stand or a bracket that came with it can be worth more than the bowl itself. And never assume that dull, faded, and plain means cheap. In this category, the pattern that got scrubbed off in the dishwasher is the same pattern that's worth hundreds when it didn't. Because somewhere out there, on a shelf above a refrigerator, holding spare keys and rubber bands, there's a plain white bowl that a woman got as a wedding gift in 1959 and used until her hands couldn't manage it anymore. Nobody in that house ever thought of it as anything but an old bowl. And quietly, without anyone in the family realizing it, it may be worth more than everything else in that kitchen combined.